Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Of course, as always, I'm your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman, and the playoffs have officially started and game ones are over. So, in this episode today, we are going to be recapping all the game ones while giving you a little series preview with the 1 and 8 seeds, diving a little bit more deeper into those game ones specifically because we haven't really previewed those series yet, even though specifically one of them probably won't be that much of a series. We'll still preview those a little bit, and we'll get into our game ones as we preview what's going to happen in our game twos as well. The playoffs field is set, game ones are done, and we are officially in playoff mode. So without further ado, let's get right into it, and let's start in order with the first game of our playoffs, where the Magic struggle offensively and lose to the Cleveland Cavaliers in game one. The Magic lost 97-83 to the Cavs as Cleveland takes a 1-0 lead and keeps home court advantage in the best-of-7 series. Honestly, quite frankly, the Cavs just looked like the better team Saturday as Orlando looked quite nervous and just not ready to play this postseason so far in this game one. Honestly, they had a lot of jitters, and it makes sense because you look at Paolo Banchero, who never played in the playoff game. You look at the Wagner brothers, especially more Franz, who's a bigger impact for that team. He's never played in the playoff game. Jalen Suggs has never played in the playoff game. Cole Anthony has never played in the playoff game. And it looked like the Orlando Magic were having the early jitters and they were really struggling offensively. And most of the game, the Cavs were up 15 to 20 points, especially in that second half. The Magic had opportunities to cut the lead, but ultimately their offense was just not good enough as they were absolutely brutal from the free throw line, missing 11 free throws, which count those up. Those could have gotten the Magic into a much better position to win and steal this game one. They also shot 32.6% from the field and an abysmal 21.5% from the three-point line. Honestly, it felt like most of the game Orlando was getting some pretty decent looks on Cleveland. I mean, you got to give credit to Cleveland's defense for holding a team to 83 points, especially in today's NBA. Even though Orlando's one of the worst offenses, they still held them to 83 points. But to me personally, it looked like Orlando had the shots. Orlando had the opportunities to steal this game, but ultimately the shots were not hitting for the Orlando Magic. And probably, as I just said, some of it was playoff jitters. Some of it has been their struggles offensively. But if the Magic want any shot at winning the series and any shot of making any noise this postseason, they're going to have to score the ball. Cleveland is not a good defensive team. Cleveland is a good defensive team, and they are not a good offensive team. If Orlando just plays some decent offense, they will win some basketball games in the series. Orlando cannot score 83 points. I don't care how good a defense is in today's NBA. I don't care how good Cleveland's defense is. You should not score 83 points in an NBA game. That is just unacceptable in today's game. You've got players who we know who are capable of scoring the ball. We know Banchero could score the ball. He had 24. He had a solid game scoring the ball. We know Cole Anthony can score the ball. We know Jalen Suggs can score the ball. We know Franz Wagner can score the ball. We know Mo Wagner can score the ball. We know this Orlando team has some players who can score the ball, and I understand Cleveland's got a great defense, but if you're Orlando, you have to step it up on the offensive side of the ball. This is the playoffs. The defense is going to be harder. The shots are going to be harder to make, but you have to step up and hit them anyway. And I understand it's the first game. It's one game for Orlando. One game doesn't define a playoff series, of course. It's best out of 7. And Orlando still has an opportunity to get home court in game 2. But from what I saw in game 1, if Orlando continues to have an abysmal offensive performance, this series will probably be over in 5 games because with Donovan Mitchell on the court for Cleveland, no matter how abysmal their offense gets at some times, Donovan Mitchell is a pure scorer, and that man can score the ball just like he did in this game when Cleveland's offense was a little stagnant, scoring 30 points and basically carrying the Cleveland Cavaliers to that victory. And quite frankly, as I just said, the Cavs didn't really have a great offensive game either. They shot 44% from the field, and they shot 26% from the three-point line. and they just didn't really have that great of an offensive game either. But at the end of the day, the Magic just were worse. As I said, just absolutely awful. Gary Harris, for example, 0 for 6. Jalen Suggs shot 14 for 16 from the field. Cole Anthony, 0 for 7 from the field, got his points from the free throw line and only made 4 of them. That is a problem for the Magic, especially when Cleveland sometimes gave them good looks. Orlando is going to have to find a way to hit shots. They just have to. There's no other way Orlando can win the series. And quite frankly, Orlando had a great defensive game. Their problem is not on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Mitchell's going to get his buckets. I mean, Allen had a dominant game. But ultimately, Orlando played solid on that side of the ball. It's the offensive side of the ball. And they are capable. Banchero's capable. The rest of those players that I just listed are capable. We've seen it in the regular season. So where is it going to be for Orlando? Because it's going to have to happen in especially one of these next 2 games, whether that's game 2 or game 3, if Orlando has any chance of staying alive in the series, because if it doesn't, they will be down 3-0 and that series will essentially be over. So the Magic are going to have to find ways to score the ball. I do expect them to respond, maybe not necessarily in game 2, but game 3, but do not count the Orlando Magic out, because trust me, this Magic team is tough, gritty, young, and hungry. They've got a young head coach who's hungry. They've got a young team who's hungry, and they will be in this series, and I believe that. And they had a really, really poor offensive game. They had the jitters, and speaking of that, Paolo Banchero really had a very disappointing game, even though he only scored 24 points, which was basically like 1/4 of Orlando's points. He had 9 turnovers. The Magic had 12 the entire game, which is solid, but Paolo Banchero had 9 turnovers, and by an individual player, 9 turnovers is absolutely unacceptable, and you cannot win a basketball game when your best player has 9 turnovers. So Banchero is going to have to find a way to take care of the ball, because some of it was just unforced turnover. Some of it was lazy passes, losing the dribble. Some of it was really unforced by the Cavs defense. It was just Banchero turning the ball over and Cleveland getting easy transition points. And for a Cavs offense that I just mentioned wasn't that good, getting easy transition points is only going to increase their chances of winning that much, because the Cavs cannot score the ball. Giving them easy points is a death sentence, because you know how good they are going to be defensively. And you know they have vulnerabilities on the offensive side of the ball. So giving them those easy points is just absolutely brutal. Not only because it hurts you because you can't score the ball, but they can't score the ball either if you're Orlando. So you are going to have to make sure Paolo takes care of the ball in game 2. But as I said, I expect Orlando to respond, and I expect Orlando to be better in the next game. But moving on from that game 1, let's go on to the first game of the Western Conference in this playoffs, where a little bit of a surprise. The Minnesota Timberwolves absolutely dominated the Oklahoma City Thunder in game 1, winning 120-95 as Anthony Edwards makes a playoff statement. Anthony Edwards makes a statement in front of the Minnesota crowd as he gets MVP chants, and he just absolutely loved it, and he wanted all the smoke against this Phoenix Suns team in game 1. And the Timberwolves in this game got their first game 1 playoff win. I'll repeat that. Their first game 1 playoff win in over 20 years. 20 years, ever since Kevin Garnett was a Minnesota Timberwolves. That's the last time they got a game 1 win in the playoff series. Kevin Garnett was in his prime. Incredible what Anthony Edwards has done to change the trajectory of that franchise. And it was pretty much led by a dominant third quarter by the Minnesota Timberwolves. They also had a solid second quarter, but they really pulled away in that third quarter, and where Anthony Edwards scored 18 of his 33 points in that third quarter. And he tied Sam Cassell in the third quarter with those 18 points for the most playoff points in a quarter by a Minnesota Timberwolves player. So Anthony Edwards just making history for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. And it really looked like all game for Minnesota that they wanted to make a statement coming out. As I said in our previous podcast, Minnesota lost all 3 matchups to the Phoenix Suns this season by double digits, and they really looked like, as I said, they wanted to make a statement. They wanted to show Phoenix that they are in this series and they can win this series and not give up home court advantage right away. And Minnesota absolutely showed that, and they showed to the rest of the league that they are not a regular season team, that this is a formidable playoff team and a threat to win the West this season and knock off not only the Phoenix Suns, but potentially the Denver Nuggets, potentially the Oklahoma City Thunder, potentially the Clippers or the Mavericks. This Minnesota Timberwolves team, with the defense they have, and if they can score 220 points on a consistent basis, look out for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. I know, again, it's only one game of a playoff series. I'm not going to overreact. Minnesota played a great game, but this just proves that Minnesota's here. Minnesota wants the smoke. Minnesota wants the smoke, and they want to win this series, and they really proved it and showed it to yesterday while they played their playoff game. For the Phoenix Suns, Kevin Durant finished with 31 points, while Devin Booker finished with 18 points, but he struggled shooting 5 for 16 from the field, and part of that was due to Anthony Edwards' incredible defense on Devin Booker. It was not only on the offensive side of the ball that Anthony Edwards was making noise. On the defensive side of the ball, he absolutely locked down Devin Booker, who we've seen in the past lead a team in 2021 to the NBA Finals. We saw what he did last playoffs, scoring 40 on a consistent basis. Anthony Edwards shut him down today, and just something incredible to see. Somebody like Anthony Edwards on both sides of the ball, absolutely dominating and taking control of the game. Also, Jaden McDaniels, not Jalen on the Toronto Raptors, Jaden McDaniels, when he was guarding Kevin Durant, held him to 1-7 shooting. And I talked about Jaden McDaniels before on our playoff series preview. He would be a huge X factor. And in the second half, when Durant was starting to heat up, cutting the lead a little bit before Minnesota went on that run, while Minnesota was on that run, when Jaden McDaniels was on Kevin Durant, and he was the only one scoring the ball for the Phoenix Suns, Jaden McDaniels locked him down, and the Suns did not respond, which is what ultimately led to Minnesota getting a huge run and ultimately led to the Suns being stagnant on offense. So Jaden McDaniels will be a huge part in this series, and he was most definitely a huge part in Game 1. Also, for this Phoenix Suns team, something that they've got to look at for Game 2, they have to have a better improvement on the defensive side of the ball and get rebounds. They were outscored by 20-6 on second chance points, and they were out rebound 52-28. 24 rebounds. I understand Minnesota has a high advantage with Towns and Gobert at the center line. But when you're giving up that many offensive rebounds, that many second chance opportunities to a Minnesota team that is more stronger on the defensive side of the ball, giving them more offensive opportunities and letting them have more opportunities to score, knowing how good their defense is, knowing that they will probably contain you on the defensive side of the ball. That is a problem. You cannot give up easy and extra opportunities to a Minnesota Timberwolves team that heavily relies on the defensive side of the ball. Because when you give them opportunities to score like today, it can get very, very ugly for the opposing team. And also, two players that really need to step up for the Phoenix Suns. Devin Booker, as I just said, I know Anthony Edwards is a solid defender and he's guarding you, but we saw what you did last playoffs. We know what you can do in the postseason, and in order for you to win this series, you need to help Kevin Durant score the basketball. Because I understand, as I just said, Timberwolves, number 1 defense in the league this season, but 90 points for the Phoenix Suns, considering that trio of KD, Booker, and Beal, that is absolutely unacceptable. You cannot rely on Kevin Durant. He literally scored a third of the Phoenix Suns' points. 1 out of every 3 points was from Kevin Durant. That cannot happen. He needs help, and that help starts with Devin Booker, and it also starts with Bradley Beal. Phoenix traded for Bradley Beal for one reason, to help this Phoenix Suns team be even more dominant on the offensive side of the ball. 15 points per game isn't going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. Bradley Beal, I know he's been injured all year, but quite frankly, he's been injured for most of his career. He needs to step up on the offensive side of the ball, just like Devin Booker, especially more him, because we've seen Devin Booker do it before in huge postseason moments. But Bradley Beal needs to be that crucial third guy on this team, because we know Kevin Durant may have an off night. We know Devin Booker may have an off night like he did yesterday. That's where that's where Bradley Beal comes in. He needs to be that third guy on the Phoenix Suns that can really elevate them. Grayson Allen had a solid game for Phoenix. He was solid. Eric Gordon did not have a solid game. Eric Gordon needs to play a little better for Phoenix. But it's ultimately going to be up to that big three. And if one of them doesn't have a good game, one of the other two need to find a way to step up in a huge way to lead the team. And Bradley Beal has to find a way to do that. Ultimately, I'm still going to pick the Suns in this series because I still trust Kevin Durant and Devin Booker in the postseason. It was one game. Phoenix will still have a prime opportunity to steal home court advantage in game 2, but I really liked what I saw from Minnesota, and they really showed the league that they are here, they are a legitimate threat, and they are making a statement as we currently sit here. Watch out for Minnesota. Still got Phoenix, but Minnesota, man, absolutely incredible. But let's move on to the third game of Saturday, where we had Josh Hart lift the New York Knicks ahead of the Philadelphia 76ers in a comeback fashion to give the New York Knicks a 1-0 lead, protecting home court advantage, and you'll see that will be a trend throughout the podcast. What was interesting for the New York Knicks in this game was Jalen Brunson scored 22 points, but he did not shoot the ball that well. He only shot 8 of 26 from the field. He did not shoot the ball well. And the question all season, especially with Julius Randle being out, with the others being out for a little bit, OG Anunoby, Bogdanovic, even though they're back now, who else is going, if Jalen Brunson has an off game, who else is going to provide, who else is going to give that scoring punch for this New York Knicks team? Who is it going to be? And I think we found our answer today, ladies and gentlemen. The Knicks found 2 guys, one starter, one off the bench, who proved themselves today in game 1, giving the New York Knicks a much-needed win over the Philadelphia 76ers. First, let me start with Josh Hart. Josh Hart scored 22 points today. He had not that great of a first half and not even that great of a third quarter. He had one of his average games. Then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, he hits 3 huge threes. And this was when Philadelphia was making a run. Philadelphia was in between 1 and 6 points on a deficit, but every time they would cut it to a 1-possession game, Josh Hart would hit a huge 3 for the New York Knicks to bring it back to a 2 or 3 possession game. And ultimately, by the time the clock expired, New York held on to win this basketball game, and it was all due to that because Philadelphia left Josh Hart open, and Josh Hart's particularly not that great of a three-point shooter, and Josh Hart stepped up and hit the three-pointers and absolutely was huge, not only on the offensive side of the ball, but defensively for that New York Knicks team in the fourth quarter. And I feel like every single time I see the ball go up in the air when the other team shoots it, Josh Hart is fighting for that rebound. And a majority of the time when Josh Hart's fighting for a rebound, even with his 6'5" height, he is getting a rebound. He is an absolute dog on the defensive end. And whenever you need him on the offensive end, he will provide for you. And that's what he did for the New York Knicks last night. And he was huge. Also, Deuce McBride. Don't even get me started with him. He was a bench warmer for the New York Knicks before they traded Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett to the Toronto Raptors. He got his opportunity. Thibodeau and the Knicks let Deuce McBride get his opportunity. He got his opportunity in the second half of the season, and he took absolute advantage of it, and now is becoming a core piece in that New York Knicks rotation and solidifying himself to be the backup point guard. And in this game, Deuce McBride scored 21 points and had a game high out of anybody, even though the Knicks only won by 7. He had a plus minus of plus 37. What? Plus 37. And when he was in the game, Tyrese Maxey wasn't scoring the ball as much, even though Tyrese Maxey did have a solid game with 33 points. When Deuce McBride was guarding him, Tyrese Maxey was struggling. Deuce McBride's impact on both the offensive and the defensive side of the ball, just like Josh Hart today, was absolutely astounding. Locking down Tyrese Maxey and hitting timely shots, not even hitting shots, hitting timely shots, and hitting timely shots is much harder to do. And the timely shots when Philly was gaining momentum, all of a sudden Philly looks like they're about to come back. Looks like Philly's going to take the lead with momentum. All of a sudden, 3 from Deuce McBride, a steal from Deuce McBride. Deuce McBride really changed the pace of that game, especially in the second quarter for the New York Knicks and in the third quarter as well, giving the New York Knicks much needed momentum going into the second half and for the start of the third quarter before Philly got the momentum back going into the fourth quarter. Deuce McBride has been huge for the New York Knicks in the second half of the season, and he proved it in this game. And Jalen Brunson said at the end of the game in an interview with his local MSG network, what is the reason why the New York Knicks won today? He said 2 words, and those 2 words were Deuce McBride, and you have to agree with him. His impact on the court, you saw it in the box score, plus 37. But when you watch the game, his ability to guard the best player on the other team, his ability to hit shots when you need him to hit shots, it's just been astounding for this New York Knicks team to just find this guy sitting on the bench all season, giving him an opportunity to step up, and he has absolutely delivered. And what we learned from this game is the New York Knicks can win a basketball game without their star player being good. And Jalen Brunson, he had an off night, which we haven't seen a lot. He's looked like an MVP candidate this season, and he had an off night. And we learned, even with an off night, other players can step up for the New York Knicks. It's not Brunson or bust for this New York Knicks teams, which for most of the season, quite frankly, we thought it was. But the New York Knicks made a statement, and they proved that that is not the case. Also, for the New York Knicks, Mitchell Robinson had 8 points and 12 rebounds, was huge on the offensive glass, and Bogdanovich had 13 off the bench as well. New York Knicks bench absolutely dominated the Philadelphia 76ers bench. I don't know the exact score, but I know it was an absolute domination on that stat line. Also, for Philadelphia, they blew a lead. They were up 13 to start the first quarter. Then all of a sudden, they had a disastrous second period. Of course, that was due to part of Embiid being out the last 3 minutes of the quarter, as he had another injury scare where he went up for his first dunk ever since the injury with 2:49 left in the second quarter. And after he hit the dunk, it was a off the backboard throw it to himself dunk, which was an absolutely incredible play. He went on the ground and he looked like to be in a lot of pain, and he went into the locker room. He would play, of course, in the second half if you watch the game. But that was scary for the Philadelphia 76ers. And of course, we know that Embiid is not 100% due to that knee, and it is a scary sign when Joel Embiid is struggling and on the ground with that knee, and that could be a concern in this series because Joel Embiid is the heart and soul of that team. But after Joel Embiid got down, the Knicks scored 9 straight, extending the lead from 4 to 13 going into the halftime break, which was huge for the New York Knicks. But as I said, going back to Embiid, Embiid is the Philadelphia 76ers, and Embiid needs to be healthy if the Philadelphia 76ers have a shot at winning the series, and he did not look 100% in that game. I think that game was 100% winnable for the Philadelphia 76ers, and ultimately, Joel Embiid was not healthy. The Knicks did step up. As I just mentioned, their role players stepped up, and you got to give them credit. But again, Joel Embiid is not healthy. I picked the Sixers in 6 because I thought Joel Embiid would get healthier as the series progressed, and I still stand by that, and I still believe it. But this is still from the playing game against Miami where he went down, to now this where he went down. It is definitely a concern for Philadelphia. And of course, most people around the league, most fanatics will be monitoring that as we progress in this series. And that could be a huge factor in determining who wins the series, of course, because Embiid, an absolute medicine before his injury, of course, we know he scored 1.01 points per every minute, which is more than a point a minute, which is absolutely incredible efficiency on the floor from any player in the league. One of the best we've ever seen since Wilt Chamberlain did it. And it's huge if Joel Embiid is not 100% healthy for this Philadelphia 76ers team, and he needs to be healthy. And another reason why Philadelphia did lose this game, other than Joel Embiid not looking 100%, they gave up 23 offensive rebounds. 23 offensive rebounds, which led to 26-8 New York Knicks favor in the second chance points. They lost by 7, and they got outscored by 18 on the second chance points, which it's just inexcusable if you're the Philadelphia 76ers. You have Embiid, you have big guys to rebound the ball, you have Paul Reed, you have Tobias Harris in the lineup. There should be no excuse to why you are not rebounding the ball against Isaiah Hartenstein, even though he's a solid rebound, and in Mitchell Robinson, who just came back from injury. The New York Knicks cannot out-rebound you that badly. And if the Philadelphia 76ers do that, they will lose the game because, of course, as I mentioned, this was a 100% winnable game for Philadelphia. They had leads in the fourth quarter. This was probably the best game of all the game ones because most of them were pretty much double-digit wins. Philadelphia had opportunities to win this basketball game, and if it wasn't for that, I believe they would have won this basketball game, and I think they need to figure out the rebounding issue, and I think they will. I'm still sticking with my pick, Philadelphia in 6, as I mentioned, but a little bit conservative in Embiid's health, but I'm still going to stick with the pick because, as I said, that game was definitely winnable for Philly, and I definitely liked some stuff that I saw from Philadelphia in that game. But shout out to the Knicks. They did get that game 1, and they did control and keep home court advantage for now. Game 2 will be tonight at 7:30 on TNT, so stay ready for that. Enjoy that. And we'll see what happens going into game 3 in Philadelphia. And even if Philly goes down 2-0, I still think Philadelphia will have a chance in the series because Philadelphia is a tough place to play. And New York has shown vulnerabilities on the road this season. So ultimately, I still think this series might be one of the best in the first round, but we'll just have to wait and see. But let's go on to the final game of Saturday where the Lakers, history repeats itself as they blow another double-digit lead to the Nuggets, just like they did last season. The Lakers had a 12-point lead in the second quarter, and they let it slip as the Nuggets won 114-103, and they take a 1-0 lead in the series while protecting home court advantage. LeBron in this game had a great first half. He had an amazing first half score, and he had 19 points, and he hit a logo three-pointer. It was an absolutely incredible shot to end the first half, giving the Lakers a 3-point lead, even though the Nuggets were having momentum. It looked like the Lakers finally, after the Nuggets went on a run to cut the deficit from 12 to a tie game, had some momentum going into the break. LeBron, absolutely incredible in that first half, and Aaron Gordon did not look like he could get a stop on LeBron James in that half. And it looked like the Lakers, for most of that half, was in control of the basketball game. And it reminds you a little bit of game 1 of last year in the conference finals, where they had control of the basketball game, but they ultimately blew it. Also, Anthony Davis in this basketball game, he had a great game, just like game 1 of the conference finals. He had 35 points, 5 assists, and 12 rebounds. And I also think he had 4 blocks as well. Anthony Davis had a dominant game. But for Denver, Jokic, of course, absolute masterpiece, 32 points, 7 assists, and 12 rebounds. And it looked like nobody could stop him down low, whether that was Anthony Davis, whether that was Rui Hachimura or Jackson Hayes. Nobody could stop Jokic down low, and he was easily getting to his spots, whether that was him scoring layups or kicking it out to the corner for a KCP 3 or an MPJ 3. It was just pretty much ever since late in that second quarter, halfway through that second quarter, it was just pretty much easy offense for the Denver Nuggets as they outscored the Lakers by 25 since the middle of the second quarter to the end of the game. So absolute domination from Denver from that point on. Jamal Murray also had a solid game for this Denver Nuggets team. As expected, he had 22 and 10. And a reason why the Lakers got killed and got ran on in the second half was because they gave up 15 offensive rebounds, and Denver got 18 second chance points, just like Philadelphia with New York. The Lakers gave the Nuggets extra opportunities, even though the Lakers were having solid defensive possessions, solid 24 second defensive possessions, and they just give up the offensive board. And quite frankly, when you have Anthony Davis on the court, that's a little bit inexcusable. I don't care that AD had 12 rebounds. You need to protect the glass. I don't care how many rebounds Jackson Hayes had. You need to protect the glass. Denver is a great offensive team, and when they're hitting their shots, they are absolutely lethal to stop, and you're giving them extra opportunities. That cannot happen. You cannot get outscored in the second chance battle against this Denver Nuggets team, because if you're Los Angeles, your offense is not the greatest from the three-point line, and sometimes it can be a struggle, and it can be stagnant on the offensive side of the ball for the Lakers. And if you're giving a great offensive team and a great basketball team, the defending NBA champions, extra opportunities, it will not go well for your basketball team. And what ultimately killed the Lakers was the start of the third quarter, where the Denver Nuggets went on a 12-0 run, which included 3 KCP three-point shots, which extended the lead from, if I'm not mistaken, 3 points to 15 points. And that ultimately, from that stretch on, was absolute Denver domination, as Denver and the Lakers were pretty much even after that. And Denver obviously held on to win, but KCP got 3 really good wide open looks for the Denver Nuggets, and it was based off the Lakers' turnovers. Honestly, that run was juiced by the Lakers' turnovers. And the Lakers, the reason why they lost this game, quite frankly, wasn't because Denver played a great game. Because honestly, at points in this game, Denver really wasn't playing great. They weren't hitting their shots. They were giving up easy shots. But the Lakers were turning the ball over, and they were in the second half especially. The first half, they were good. Second half, they turned the ball over. They gave they gave the Nuggets opportunities to creep back in this game. And on the fast break, Jokic or Murray bringing it up the floor with the shooters of KCP and Murray and someone in the dunker spot like Aaron Gordon, absolutely lethal offense on the transition for the Denver Nuggets. Also in the second half, a reason why Denver won. Aaron Gordon held LeBron to 8 second half points. He had 19, as I mentioned, in the first half, but Aaron Gordon played a very solid job on him in the second half. And if Aaron Gordon continues to do that like he did last year, I expect the Nuggets to quickly win this series in 5 games, maybe 6 at the most. Maybe potentially even another sweep, because the way the Lakers blew that game, especially since the way they played like so efficient in the first half, it doesn't really give me a lot of confidence in the Lakers' ability to hang in this series against the defending champs. And also, D'Angelo Russell, let's just talk about him for a moment. An amazing finish to the regular season, of course. We were talking about him and how he improved, how he's looked his best since 2019 when he was the best player on that Brooklyn Nets when they were the 6th seed. He had a great playing game against the Pelicans, was probably the biggest reason why they won that game. And ultimately, he just was a no-show in this game, in this first game of the playoffs. Obviously, it's one game, but we know the concerns of last year in the first round of the playoffs. If you're D'Angelo Russell, you know what happened last year in the playoffs where you didn't have a good performance, and it's happening again. He shot 6 for 20 from the field and missed 13 out of his last 16 shots of the game. That is unacceptable if you are D'Angelo Russell and the Lakers. One of the reasons why the Lakers were so good in the second half of the season was because D'Angelo Russell was solidifying himself as the third guy. He was solidifying himself as the third scorer to help LeBron, to help AD facilitate and score. But if he cannot be that third scorer in the postseason, the Lakers are not going anywhere. You need 3 guys to win a championship. You need a 1, a 2, and a 3. Obviously, we know who 1 and 2 are. Who is the three for this Lakers team? We've been asking that question for the past few years. We thought D'Angelo Russell, after this past great regular season finish, could be that third guy, but he just did not show up in this game and missed makeable shots that he made in the regular season. And of course, some people just don't thrive in the playoffs, and some people do not thrive in huge games. And sometimes that's who a player is. But of course, it's one game, and we're not going to overreact because D'Angelo Russell could, of course, have a great game. But it's just something to bring up because we know what happened in last year's playoffs. So that's definitely a concern for the Lakers going down the stretch. And they have to have D'Angelo Russell play better if the Lakers want any shot at winning this series. But let's go on to the Sunday games, yesterday's games. And let's start with the 8-1 matchup where the Boston Celtics in this game, from wire to wire, absolutely dominated from start to finish. You could see in the first possession against the Miami Heat, where they missed a three, got an offensive rebound, and hit a wide open three, that they were going to win this basketball game as they beat the Miami Heat 114-94. And they were up as many as 34 points in this basketball game. And number one thing, of course, as you notice, they outscored the Heat from the 3-point line 22-12, which is 30 points from the 3-point line alone. That's an automatic loss. Of course, Boston is one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the league this year. They have great 3-point shooters, but scored by 10 threes, especially when you're an underdog like that. That is not going to get the job done if you're the Miami Heat. Miami is going to have to find a way to hang in with this Boston team offensively. We know Miami is not the greatest team on the offensive side of the ball, and we know their best player and the guy who usually steps up for them in the playoffs, Playoff Jimmy, is not out with an MCL injury, but it still doesn't matter because this is who you've got in the lineup, and they need to step up on the offensive side of the ball. Tyler Hero needs to step up. Tyler Hero did not play good for the Miami Heat in this game. And Miami, for the slim chances they have at winning the series, if they want any shot at winning this series, quite frankly, Tyler Hero needs to step up for this Miami Heat team. Shooting 4 for 13 from the field is unacceptable. First of all, he should be taking more shots because he is the best player for this Miami Heat team on the offensive side of the ball. I know Bam is there, of course, right now, and Bam had a decent game with 24 points for the Miami Heat, but someone who I know who has proven to me before can get a bucket, can shoot outside shots, can create his own shot. That man is Tyler Hero, and I understand you've got Drew Holiday on you, and they're going to key on you because that's how Boston plays defense, and they key on the best player, and they do it to perfection. But it doesn't matter. You're going to have to step up Tyler Hero. There's just no excuse. You were on the trade block last year for this team, and you will definitely be on it again if you don't step up because Miami, if they get swept or they lose in 5 to this series, they know changes are going to be made to potentially upgrade to a superstar. And the number one player that's probably going to be in a trade for a superstar will be Tyler Hero. And Tyler Hero has to prove that he can be a third guy on a championship contender team, because if he has these poor shooting nights consistently in the series, I think Tyler Hero will be traded this offseason. But going to Boston's side of this, of course, Boston had an incredible game. They've looked like the best team in the league, of course. Jason Tatum had his first playoff triple-double, which is pretty surprising to me, quite frankly, because I feel like he's played in so many playoff games that I feel like he would have one before. But this has been his first playoff triple-double ever. He scored 23 points, 10 assists, and 10 rebounds in that game. Porzingis was also very dominant for the Boston Celtics as he had 18, but his impact defensively to me is what stood out. At the rim, Miami really likes their drive and kick game to the 3-point line, but Porzingis just provides such a big presence at the rim. It's just so hard to attack at the rim when Porzingis is just going to stop you just with purely his body. He's just such an intimidator down low. It's just really hard to get baskets up there, and then Boston can keen in on Miami's 3-point shots because on the 3-point line, the guards can stop the three-point line because they trust Porzingis on a one-on-one matchup defensively. Even though Bam had a 24-point game, the others, that they beat the Boston's defenders when they were attacking the rim, it was not easy for Miami to get shots up on the rim. And that is just an credit to Kristaps Porzingis. Also, going back to Porzingis on the offensive side of the ball, he makes this Boston Celtics team absolutely lethal. 22 threes, that's because of Kristaps Porzingis. When Porzingis sets the screen and he picks and pops, especially on a screen with Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, when they're going downhill, you're going to have to help on that because you know how explosive Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown can be. And then it just leaves Porzingis open, and it's absolutely brutal. And it's even if you try to recover, even if you do recover, he's still 7'3", and even if you put a hand up, Porzingis still may hit the shot. And it's just that hard to guard the Boston Celtics with him on the court. And Porzingis this season has really opened the offense for the Boston Celtics and just has brought this team to a whole nother level. It's just been absolutely incredible because Porzingis, we saw as the second best, maybe third best guy on teams. He had a solid season with Washington last year, but nothing really stood out. But with this Boston Celtics team, they are using his skills to perfection, and they've really opened up this Boston Celtics offense. They had to give up the heart and soul of their team in Marcus Smart, but it has absolutely paid off. And with Porzingis, the Celtics team has absolutely looked dominant throughout the season, and they absolutely looked dominant throughout the game. Now, let me get to the bad news for the Boston Celtics in this game. As I mentioned, they were up 34 points in the third quarter. They finished the third quarter, if I'm not mistaken, up 34 points. I think it was 91 to 57, if I'm not mistaken, 93 to 59. I'm not sure what the exact score was at the end of the third quarter, but I know they were up 34. Now, even though it may have been garbage time because the Celtics were up 34, they had their starters in the basketball game. Their starters were still on the floor. I don't know why, but they were still on the floor. Maybe for Joe Mazzulla because they wanted to build up the players, the starters, to get more minutes because obviously their minutes are going to ramp up in a postseason run. So maybe that's why Mazzulla played them so much in a blowout, which doesn't really make any sense to me because you probably want to rest your players in a blowout. But he played his starters anyway, and when the lead was 34, Miami cut the lead down to 14 with about 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and they had an opportunity to potentially make it a little more interesting, but Miami didn't hit their shots. But Boston gave up an essential 20-point swing in 7 minutes of game action, which is very concerning if you're a Boston Celtics fan. I know they won this game and they pretty much dominated the game, but looking at the long term of this Boston Celtics playoff run, you cannot have that stretch where you are giving up 20 points. You cannot take your foot off the gas if you're the Celtics. You need to have your foot on the gas all 48 minutes of the basketball game. I saw it when I was watching the game. Al Horford was on the Celtics players. He was yelling at the Celtics stars and Tatum and Brown and Porzingis because he knew that this Miami Heat team is scrappy and they weren't going to give up. Even though Miami was still probably going to lose the game anyway, Miami still found a way to make the game just a little bit more interesting, and Celtics fans got a little bit tense, and it was definitely a concerning stretch for the Celtics. And it's not even that. The fact that it was just concerning for the Celtics, Miami gained momentum during that stretch. Miami gained momentum that they could potentially carry to game two. It just takes a little bit of momentum to change a playoff series. I'm not saying Miami's going to win. I'm not saying that because Miami, of course, has very slim chances without Jimmy Butler, and they had a very slim chance anyway, even if they had Jimmy Butler, considering the dominant season Boston had. But you gave Miami momentum to end the game, and that could build going into a game two of a playoff series. That could definitely build, and that could definitely cost the Boston Celtics a potential game. And if Miami gets one game, the media is going to start chirping. I'm not saying that Boston still wouldn't win the series, but there would definitely be concerns. And you gave Miami momentum to potentially steal home court advantage in game two. I'm not saying they will, but it's definitely a concern for the Boston Celtics when looking at the long term of what they want to succeed this season and hanging banner number 18. They're going to have to be consistent for 48 minutes. And what we saw in that stretch from 12 minutes to 5 minutes in the fourth quarter is not going to win you an NBA championship. So overall, they did look like men among boys for most of the game, but that 20-point stretch was a little bit concerning for the Celtics. But other than that, they played an amazing game. 22 threes, absolutely incredible for the Celtics. And they're just absolutely on all five positions of that starting lineup with Holiday, White, Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis, just absolutely lethal. And Sam Hauser also had an amazing game. He hit 4 crucial threes when Miami was trying to cut the lead a little bit. Miami had some momentum going in to the second quarter, cutting the lead to 5. Sam Hauser hit 4 threes and pretty much gave Boston back that commanding 15-point lead for them, which was huge. And they just really had an amazing game other than that stretch. And if it wasn't for that, I would say perfect game. Great way to execute. But that 20-point stretch, it's just a concern. Even though they won, we have expectations for this team, and we're critiquing on this team on what their expectations are, ultimately, what their end goal ultimately is. We have to critique them because they need to play flawless for 48 minutes in basketball games, especially as they get later and later into the postseason when they play a team like a potential Bucks or a Knicks team or a Sixers team in the conference finals, when they play a Denver, a Clippers, a Minnesota, a Phoenix, any team in the West, they're going to have to play 48 minutes of solid basketball, and that is why we are critiquing them. But overall, still, great game for the Celtics. But let's go on to the Los Angeles Clippers, where a little bit of a surprise to some people, the Los Angeles Clippers, in what was an upset according to Vegas, defeated the Dallas Mavericks 109-97 after a second half scare by the Dallas Mavericks after they struggled mightily in the first half. James Harden, of course, as you can see on the board, had an absolutely dominant first half as he scored 20 of his 28 points in the first half for the Clippers to get them out to a 29-point lead. Absolutely incredible first half for James Harden. And this is the James Harden we expect to see in the postseason because we saw it in Philadelphia the past 2 seasons. He's had struggles in the postseason so far, and we know that James Harden absolutely needs to be the third guy. He needs to be the number 3, someone who's there when one of the best players doesn't have a good game or when one of the best players is out, like today with Kawhi Leonard. That guy needs to step up, and James Harden absolutely did step up today. Obviously, it's just one game because we're not supposed to have overreactions because it's one game. It's a 7-game playoff series. But James Harden, if he can play this way, the Clippers will win this basketball series. If James Harden can play like this, along with Kawhi back in the lineup eventually, with Paul George getting consistently 20, the Clippers will win this basketball series. Because James Harden scoring like that is just unstoppable. Nobody can stop that. And if they keen on Harden, you've got Kawhi and Paul George to help the scoring load. It's just hard to stop all 3 of them. And if Harden's going to be like that in the playoffs, which we haven't seen in the past few years, look out for the Clippers to potentially make a run to the NBA Finals, and most definitely, if they win this series, to the Western Conference Finals. Ivica Zubac also had a pretty decent game for the Los Angeles Clippers. I think he had a career high in the postseason with 20 points and 15 rebounds, and he was absolutely getting to his spots in the paint against both Gafford and Lively in what was their first playoff games, I think, of their careers, if I'm not mistaken. So they had a little bit of jitters going into their first game, and Ivica Zubac absolutely dominated in the first half, just like James Harden, and really got to his spots, hitting real easy bunnies. And just every single time Dallas hit a shot after they missed 5 straight, Zubac would just get another easy one, and it would just be more momentum to the Clippers in that first half. And for Dallas in the first half, they really came out stagnant. They were down 26 to end the half. They really weren't hitting any shots. Kyrie and Luka only combined for 17 points in that first half. Dallas, quite frankly, was shooting 20 6% from three, like low 30s from the field. It just wasn't a typical Dallas game, and we know how good Dallas can be on the offensive side of the ball. And when Dallas is not having a good game offensively, especially even though their defense has improved a little bit lately, we still know that their defense is not one to really be afraid about. And the Clippers completely took advantage of that as they scored 60 points in the first half. Not an incredible first half offensive display by the Clippers, but one with a stagnant Mavericks offense pretty much caused them a major deficit and a major hole going into the second half. But going into that second half, the Dallas Mavericks played a lot better, and they, quite frankly, made the game a little bit interesting. They cut a 29-point deficit to 12 late into the game. I think they got it to as close as 10 points, if I'm not mistaken, while Kyrie and Luka played much better in the second half, scoring 37 combined in the second half compared to only 17 combined in the first half. And of course, the Mavericks are going to need to score if they want to win the series. And that's what they did in the second half. They pretty much dominated the second half, but they were in such a big hole in the first half. But it was just so hard to come back from. And the Dallas Mavericks really looked like the better team in the second half. And that could give them some momentum going into game two. But at the end of the day, personally, in my opinion, the Dallas Mavericks probably needed this game, considering Kawhi Leonard's out. This was a prime opportunity if you are the Mavericks to steal game one on the road without Kawhi Leonard for this Los Angeles Clippers team and get yourself off to the hot start in the series with a potential shot at stealing two in LA, but they didn't ultimately get that done. And now they're going to most likely probably going to need a win if they want a good chance at winning this series. Obviously, they're not done if they're down 2-0, but still, it would be brutal, especially if Kawhi's out for game two, if Dallas would lose another game without Kawhi Leonard on the court. So if Kawhi's out for the Clippers, it is a must-win for Dallas going into game two. And I expect their offense to be much better. I liked what I saw from them in the second half. They played a lot better, and they almost made the game a little bit interesting down the stretch. But the Clippers ultimately held on from big shots from Norman Powell, big shots from Paul George to end the game. And it was overall just a very solid game for the Los Angeles Clippers as they held on. But it is a little bit concerning for the Clippers that they blew that lead, because what we've seen from the Clippers this season, especially from their winning streaks, is that they move the ball. Even though most of their guys, Paul George, Harden, Kawhi, like to get their own shots, like to create for themselves, they move the ball a lot, and it really set themselves up, and that's what they did in the first half, and that's what happened in the regular season when they won 28 out of 31. But when the Clippers had those losing streaks, like when they first got Harden and they couldn't get adjusted, or at the end of the season a little bit with the injuries, and Harden and George were relying more on iso ball, the Clippers got stagnant, and they were just doing one-on-one plays, and ultimately the Mavericks got some stops. Their defense was much better. The Clippers were missing shots, and they got the opportunity to get back in the basketball game, and that is something you cannot do moving forward in the series. If you're the Clippers, you're going to have to move the ball around, because when the Clippers move the ball around, they get a good shot, whether that's Norman Powell three, a Terrence Mann drive and dunk, something for the Clippers. It works if they move the ball, and Tyronn Lue needs to emphasize that to his team, because it works beautifully when the Clippers move the ball. But when they get stagnant, it can become ugly, and they can let teams come back in the game. And Dallas should have been nowhere near this, even within 15 in this game, considering how abysmal their offense is, since they rely on it so heavily all the time. It was, quite frankly, just a shock to see them shoot the ball that poorly, and the Mavericks still had an opportunity to potentially make it even more interesting down the stretch, which they didn't do, obviously, but it is a concern for the Clippers. Just like the Celtics with letting Miami a little bit back into the game, the Clippers did the same thing with Dallas, especially, as I said, like the Celtics, with the aspirations, what the Clippers want to do with winning an NBA championship, representing the West in the NBA Finals, which they have the path to do so. They're going to have to play a consistent 48 minutes, and they did not do that in this game. They had an abysmal second half, and they let a Dallas team who shot the ball poorly get back into the game, and that's something you cannot do. Put your foot off the gas when you are up big in a playoff game, which happened to two teams today, but hopefully they figure out those issues going into the next ones, and that's it for them. And let's move on to the third game of Sunday, where the Milwaukee Bucks made a defensive statement against the Pacers. The Bucks held the Pacers to what was a season low 94 points. I repeat, 94 points for the Pacers, which when considering how great their offense was this season, you've got to give credit to the Milwaukee Bucks. 94 points for a team that averages 123 points per game. And we know all season long, myself included, everybody in the NBA media has been critiquing this Milwaukee Bucks defense. And when I mean everyone, I mean everyone. Everybody was so concerned about this Milwaukee Bucks defense, and they really made a statement today in game one against what was the best offense in the history of basketball. History of basketball today. Even though some Pacers players had the jitters, like Tyrese Halliburton, who only took 7 shots today, Andrew Nembhard, Jalen Smith, Ben Shepherd, all guys who were playing in their first ever playoff games, had a little bit of ants, had a little bit of jitters, weren't playing to the way that they normally play. Still, 94 points, you've got to give credit to the Milwaukee Bucks there, because we know what happened with the whole Adrian Griffin situation. The defense was terrible. Doc really had a great defensive scheme going, and even though the Pacers probably could have made more points if they hit a little bit more shots and they weren't as antsy going into the game, you still have to really give credit for the Milwaukee Bucks, because a lot of people are picking the Pacers in the series. I stuck with the Bucks in 6 because I have this feeling when it comes to playoff time, Dame and Giannis will be at their very best. But people were picking the Pacers, and people really like the Pacers in the series. And the Bucks showed that they can still be a formidable opponent in the Eastern Conference and a formidable opponent against one team like the Boston Celtics. Now, what was interesting about this game, of course, was Damian Lillard's performance, because in the first half of this game, quite frankly, it looked like that Damian Lillard was going to beat Michael Jordan's playoff record of 63 in 1986 in Boston Garden, because he scored 35 points in the first half. I repeat, 35 points in the first half. It was an absolutely dominant first half by Damian Lillard in his Milwaukee Bucks playoff debut. And it looked like he could just not miss a single shot from the field. But then in the second half, he had 0 points. 0. I just don't understand basketball. But 0 points from 35 to 0. That's just absolutely incredible. But for the Bucks, part of the reason why they won, obviously, was because of Dame, because of the defense. But the players who I said needed to step up for Milwaukee when I was previewing the series, I said players need to step up, help Dame without Giannis on the offensive side of the ball. They stepped up today. And one of the names that I've been critiquing personally has been Chris Middleton, and he stepped up to the plate today with 23 points and was absolutely huge for the Milwaukee Bucks and got his jump shot back, and he's been in and out of the lineup, as I mentioned. He hasn't been the player that we saw in 2021 when Milwaukee won the title, where Giannis was giving the ball up to Chris Middleton in the crunch time. We haven't seen that Chris Middleton, but he showed flashes of it today. Not saying he is there yet to where we can trust him as the second best player or third on a championship team. But he definitely showed flashes of it today and was a crucial part in why the Milwaukee Bucks held on against the Indiana Pacers. Also, Bobby Portis, who I said would be a crucial factor without Giannis, who essentially replaces Giannis in the lineup. He had 15 points and 11 rebounds, a huge performance for the Milwaukee Bucks in this one. Again, another player, as I said, who needs to step up for this Milwaukee Bucks team, and he did that. And if Milwaukee can get these consistent performances from Middleton and Bobby Portis in this postseason, especially when Giannis comes back, the Milwaukee Bucks will be dangerous because for all the issues they've had this season, they have two top 75 players of all time. They have Giannis Antetokounmpo and they have Damian Lillard. And when you have two top 75 players of all time, you never know what can happen. You just don't know. Maybe they click at the right time because initially when we saw this team with Giannis, with Damian Lillard, we thought this team could have the potential to win the East. I picked them to win the Eastern Conference. Obviously, right now, Boston's a clear and obvious favorite. But if this Milwaukee team can get it together, which is possible because anything's possible in the postseason, it's a new season. This team could be the biggest threat to beat the Boston Celtics. And I'm not exaggerating that. Some people argue it's the Knicks. Some people may argue it could be that Pacers team with their highly scoring offense. But this Milwaukee Bucks team is making the argument, and I'm not going to jump on it yet. I still would have to say the Knicks for right now because it's just one game. But, excuse me, not the Knicks. I would say it's the Sixers right now. But from the way the Milwaukee Bucks played in this game, if they can consistently show that to me and take care of business in 6 games or less against this Indiana team, watch out for Milwaukee. Watch out. And in this game, Indiana, although they did have a disaster first half, being down by as much as 30 points, as I said, 35. Yeah, 30 points. The Indiana Pacers, quite frankly, played a much better second half. They were scoring the ball much better. They were stepping it up on the defensive side of the ball, which is something that the Indiana Pacers have not done this season. They have played terrible on the defensive side of the ball, which is why they are 6th place in the East, because with their historic offense, we expect that team to be much higher in the standings, but their defense, for how good their offense has been, their defense could make the argument it has been just as bad for the Indiana Pacers, but they definitely did pick it up in the second half, and they cut the 30-point lead that the Milwaukee Bucks had to 12 at the start of the fourth quarter, and it looked very, very interesting that the Indiana Pacers could potentially come back down 30 points, but the Milwaukee Bucks to start the fourth quarter had huge threes from Jay Crowder and Malik Beasley, back-to-back threes to extend the lead from 14 to 20, and after that, it was essentially it. But I did like the fight in the third quarter from Indiana, but I did like the response from the Milwaukee Bucks in the fourth quarter. Unlike the Clippers and unlike the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks really showed a response, and they really didn't honestly turn this into what could have been a potential disaster. They really settled the game down. They really closed the game out with, rather than the Clippers and the Celtics when it was late in the fourth quarter and they were doing it late in the fourth quarter. This Milwaukee Bucks team had the opportunity to fix their mistakes that they did in the third quarter, and they did that, and they closed out the game beautifully, and they won game 1, which, quite frankly, according to Vegas, was a game they were not supposed to win. And they won. And they won. And if you're Indiana, man, you've got to find a way to get the next one because Giannis will probably be out the next game for game 2. I'm assuming, I think, yes, it's on Tuesday. It's tomorrow. If I'm assuming Giannis will be out, and if he is out, Indiana's going to have to take it. Because when Giannis comes back and you're already down 2-0 and you've got 2 games in Indiana, I'm pretty confident that the Milwaukee Bucks with Giannis can get at least one of those games in Indiana. And I think being down 3-1 for Indiana with the Milwaukee Bucks team, with Dame and Giannis, I don't think they're going to blow a 3-1 lead, which is why I think it is crucial and potentially maybe Indiana's season if they do not get game 2 in Milwaukee. So that will be a crucial game. But moving on from that, let's go to our last game of the first set of game 1s, where we had the Oklahoma City and the New Orleans Pelicans. The Thunder squeak past the New Orleans Pelicans in what was a very, very scary game for the 1-seed Thunder. CJ McCollum had a great look at the end of the game to ultimately upset these Oklahoma City Thunder in game one, but it ultimately went in and out, and the Thunder held on 94-92 to beat the New Orleans Pelicans. Of course, mostly because this Thunder team is young. A lot of players are playing in their first playoff games, which is understandable why this game was a little bit closer. Obviously, New Orleans has CJ McCollum, who's been in plenty of playoff games with the Portland Trail Blazers, including New Orleans as well. Brandon Ingram, he's been in a couple of playoff games. Valanciunas has had experience. Pretty much everyone on New Orleans has had at least 1 year of playoff experience. But for this OKC team, you've got Chet Holmgren, both Jalen Williams, Josh Giddey, who really haven't had that much playoff experience, and it showed a little bit. Josh Giddey struggled. Lou Dort struggled a little bit today. He had 6. Giddey had 2. Shea played great with 28. But other than that, like Shea, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren, nobody else really played that well for the Oklahoma City Thunder. As I said, they struggled offensively. They only had 94 points. Nobody really off the bench was really doing anything. Isaiah Joe had an off night. Cason Wallace, he impacted defensively. He played great defense on CJ McCollum on that last play of the game, but he didn't really have a great game offensively. So I understand a little bit why the Thunder struggled, but ultimately they probably shouldn't have been in that close of a game with the New Orleans Pelicans, considering the struggles they've had. Of course, Brandon Ingram continued to struggle, shooting 5 from 17 from the field, only scoring 12 points. And this is definitely a concern for the Pelicans for the past couple of games. Brandon Ingram has been struggling, and if the New Orleans Pelicans want to pull off this upset, especially without Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram needs to be assertive and needs to be the number one and best player on the court, even better than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, better than his teammate CJ McCollum. Brandon Ingram is the most versatile player out of the three, and Brandon Ingram needs to be the best player in order for the New Orleans Pelicans to pull off the 8-1 upset in the first round. And 12 points on, as I said, 15 for 17 shooting is not going to cut it. Also, Herb Jones didn't really have a great game, 2 for 10. CJ McCollum had a solid game in the fourth quarter, but mostly in the first half, not really so good, 9 for 22. And what ultimately cost the New Orleans Pelicans today was just honestly the lack of taking advantage of the Thunder's mishaps. The Thunder went 5 to 6 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, in that fourth quarter without scoring a field goal, and the New Orleans Pelicans didn't really take advantage of that, and that kept the Thunder in the game. And the Thunder at the end of the game was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, obviously as clutch as he is, and he is a nominee for Clutch Player of the Year, which we will get into the award nominations on the next show. Shout out to Shai. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to deliver down the stretch. So the fact that the Pelicans did not really take advantage of what was Oklahoma City's mishaps in the fourth quarter just was disappointing for the Pelicans, as when you're trying to pull off an 8-1 upset, even though the Thunder are not considered a super strong 1 seed and they have some vulnerabilities, they're still a 1 seed, and it's still hard to beat them. And any chance you have at potentially stealing a game against a 1 seed, you have to take advantage of it. The New Orleans Pelicans did not take advantage of this today, and they are definitely going to look back on this loss, especially if they lose the series, as one that could definitely be career-altering, as the Pelicans, as I said, they missed a major opportunity to win this game as the Pelicans squeaked by. And what was interesting overall in today's playoff games and yesterday's playoff games and Saturday's playoff games was the fact that every single home team won. Every 1, 2, 3, 4 seed won. All the home teams were 8-0 in game ones, so every team maintained home court advantage. We'll see if that stays the same for game 2. I highly doubt it. One team at least is going to make it interesting, if not more. But that is just a little bit of a nugget, and that's the first time that has happened, where all 8 teams that are at home have won game 1 since 2013. So that's very interesting to look at. Very strong, top-heavy seeds, especially with Boston, with Denver, OKC, solid, Minnesota. You've got New York, Milwaukee, Cleveland, as well as the 4 seed in the West, the Clippers all winning their games. So that's a little bit of a surprising stat. But overall, for this Thunder Pelicans game, going back to it, I'm just disappointed that the Thunder didn't take advantage of it, considering that the Thunder didn't really have a great game, and it was an in the mud game. It was pretty much to the Pelicans' pace, an in the mud, a scrappy game, low scoring, where the Thunder thrive in high scoring contests. This was a low scoring one, and ultimately the Pelicans just did not get the job done. Of course, if they had Zion, it may have been a different story, but obviously that was not the case, and they lost that game, and we'll have to see what happens for game two. Obviously, the Pelicans will probably still have a decent shot to get game two because the Thunder are still obviously adjusting to the playoffs. But very brutal loss for the Pelicans. And I think we're going to end it there. I think that's all the time we have for today, recapping all the game ones. And on Wednesday, we are going to be recapping a couple of the game twos, as well as previewing some game twos and discussing the award finalists for each category as the top three were announced today. So thank you so much for watching the show. And please remember to follow me on Instagram at take_your_shot_podcast_. That's at take_your_shot_podcast_. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. That's all my shots for the day. Thank you so much. Please leave a like and subscribe. Take your shot. We'll be back on Wednesday. Thanks so much.